welcome to another episode of the Science of Psychotherapy podcast. My name is Matthew Darlitz. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Science of Psychotherapy. And as always, here with Richard Hill, managing editor and co-author and all-round good guy, Richard.
Yeah. Hi, Matt. This is an extraordinary, tumultuous day. We have either the most wonderful or the most ridiculous guests that we've ever had.
Yes.
I'm being silly, but we're going to talk about our work today because we have, at last, our book is entering into the purchasable space. Amazon finds us true and real, and we're going to be here. So we want to start talking about all the different aspects in the book, and I don't know, we could talk for years. Sorry, folks, don't get too depressed. But if we do, we just work through and just expand on what's in the book, because, of course, since writing it, we've actually come up with more information. And
that's right.
More ideas and thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a good idea for us to be able to step through a lot of what we do have in the book, because it is there's a lot to cover, right? And to be able to break it down and talk about discrete elements, I think will be very helpful for everyone. So for those of you who do not know, our new book just out is The Practitioner's Guide to the Science of Psychotherapy.
Yes, and we want you to rush out now, pre-sales or sales, but certainly get in and have a look at what we're doing and listen to us as we're going on. And today, let's start at the beginning. I mean, there is the most wonderful foreword by John Arden.
Yes.
And we might talk about that later, but we thought we'd start with the area of the introduction, which seems reasonable to me.
Yeah. Now, before we touch on the introduction, Richard, let's just talk about motivation. So why did we write this in the first place?
We had nothing else to do. We were locked down in COVID-19. Yeah, no, it's actually a really good question. I'm not sure I've really thought about it because it just seems like the opportunity arose. Certainly, Norton's showed interest in what we were doing, but there were some options. I know we could have just sort of packaged together a bit of stuff, but we decided let's get into something new, something fresh. And I think John caught it and described it. He said, what you guys are describing, and it's a term that he actually had in his book, Mind, Brain, Gene, you're describing the 21st century therapist.
Right.
And I found that, I thought, yeah, that's important. That's something that needs to be done. We need to change and grow and expand. And what is that change and growth and expansion? And how can we support it?
That's right. And, we started out as the neuropsychotherapist, and what we covered was fairly narrow. We were covering the neurobiology pertinent to psychotherapy, but then we sort of expanded, and then Richard, as you sort of came on more full time, we thought we need to change this, because what we're doing is we're encompassing a whole range of disciplines and bringing them together to inform the psychotherapist. So we came up with the name, The Science of Psychotherapy, which is way broader. And then we saw all of these different perspectives, all sort of looking at psychotherapy from different angles, of course, but there were some fundamentals there that sort of played into what we had been talking about for many years about nonlinear complex systems.
And we also had some wonderful conversations with people along the way as we were doing this, who told us some rather hard truths. Lou Cozzolino, he said, you realize there's no such thing as a neuropsychotherapist, meaning as a sort of a specialist type of field or process.
Yeah.
He was saying this is something we incorporate into the psychotherapeutic interpersonal framework.
Yeah.
And of course, it was my mentor, Ernest Rossi, that really encouraged us to think about all these other things like genetics and complex systems, as you were just starting to allude to there, which we'll talk about some more in a minute. And then some other really interesting people that we've talked about and talked to in various podcasts and had articles written. These all expanded our sense of awareness of what we need to know. And then we freaked out about it. And I remember sitting there sort of going, what we need to do is we need to give people, instead of a bookshelf full of detailed books on every subject under the sun, which leaves it impossible because we just got overwhelmed. We just need a single volume that gives us a walk through what we need to know about.
Yeah, exactly.
Create an awareness. Yeah,
exactly. And I saw our roles as very much like with the magazine that we do and our platform, the Science of Psychotherapy. We're the curators of. There's just so much research out there. There's just so much information out there. And so we're playing the role of the curator, bringing together the most pertinent sort of information together for the practicing therapist, to be able to get a good, broad understanding without having to go and do, all the searches through PubMed and read all the papers.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the things about the book, which I think we actually say it a few times in the book, is go to the reference list, go to that area of the book to explore yourself. And the wonderful thing is, as we found as we go through, we go and find a paper. And some of the places where you can find papers on the side, they'll have another list of associated or papers that are similar and so on and so forth. And sometimes I would really just have to almost have an alarm bell that says enough, enough, you must stop looking at all this information. But what I found, Matt, which was so interesting and inspired by Ernie, but also my own life, is that when I knew something particular, something specific, like when I was studying and I learned, okay, so do CBT or do EMDR or do whatever. But that was great and it was very useful stuff. But the more I learned about what I could know, I actually found myself becoming more creative with my work.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a metaphor that we've spoken about a few times on our podcast, and that is being an improviser.
Yeah.
So in the musical sense, someone who does improvisation, they might know classical music as well as jazz, as well as pop, and they're able to integrate a whole lot of things together. And they may play in a certain style. So they may be a jazz musician, but they could also play Chopin.
Yeah.
But in their improvisation of jazz, they're drawing on their knowledge of all of these other different musical idioms. And so I think that's a great metaphor for the therapist who is able to draw on many different bits of knowledge and then do their own improvisation.
So we still had to give this book form and shape. And in the introduction, we try and discuss those frames. And I've got something I just want to read out of the book.
Sure,
I went back and I had a little look. I thought, what did we say? But I was looking at, and one of the things which I was kind of really keen to do. This was one of my ones. Case study. I put in we start off with a case study that you could look at from so many perspectives.
Yeah.
And there were so many potentials. And the ability to understand the case actually requires your knowledge about a number of things beyond just simple siloed elements of, be it experiential, be it trauma-based, be it pathological-based, that you needed a sense of all those. So that's something that you'll find in the introduction begins you, and then we talk about it at the end.
Yeah.
But we were trying to think of what are the frameworks? What really is this being framed? And we actually write it down that the chapters, and I'm just quoting here, the chapters are oriented by 3 foundational principles. Number 1, that the client has natural capacities. Cool. Number 2, that therapy is a co-created experience. And number 3, that therapy functions in a complex system.
Right.
And on the basis of that, we found ourselves able to expand out into all these different areas and talk about psychopathologies and affective disorders and brain states and genetic conditions and all the other bits and pieces that we go through the book.
Yeah. So on that point, I was just thinking before we came on, I was thinking, first of all, what the book isn't, and then what the book is. So what the book isn't, it's not a categorization of and descriptions of psychopathologies, although we do cover psychopathologies. It's not about the philosophy of psychotherapy, although it is philosophical, I guess.
Yes, we wax lyrical every now and again. Yeah.
It's not about technique, and yet we talk about a lot of varied techniques.
Yes, we actually have a whole section on what the experts do.
Yeah. And it's not comprehensive, like it's not encyclopedic, and yet it's very broad.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, it's a jumping off point for so much additional stuff. But then we had to think about what it is.
Yeah.
And
so what is it?
It is about embracing these interdisciplinary perspectives. And we've got some things to say about that. Yeah. And it is about thinking in terms of complex systems. And we better discuss that a little bit. That's in the introduction.
Yeah.
And it's about equipping therapists to think on their feet, creativity, the innovation you were talking about.
That's right.
And what else?
Yeah, so not being stuck in any one paradigm or technique or perspective. Mm-hmm. It's about knowing the specifics in biology, genetics, psychopathology, techniques, all of these things that we cover. And yet, like I was just saying before about improvisation, it's being able to draw on all of those things in a creative way with the client in therapy, with what the client brings to therapy. And we'll talk about that aspect in a second.
Yeah.
And then being able to improvise out of that. So we're not locked into anything. We're open to everything, and yet we can still be very effective, very personalized to the client because of this knowledge that we've got sort of bedded down.
And this actually is maybe a nice time to introduce in that concept one of my favorite words, which is responsibility.
Yes.
Which is probably most people's least favorite word because it's been stolen from us. The true meaning and the true power of the word has been stolen from us. And I argue in other places about other words that have had that we've socially remanipulated, reframed them. And because the current sort of feeling of responsibility, like a therapist has to be responsible, right? Because a responsible person does the right thing. And if you do the wrong thing, then you're irresponsible. And it's sort of a good and bad, a right and wrong, a sort of a punishment and guilt sort of thing. But that's not the meaning of the word at all. And the way we use the word and the way we use this book is what the word really is: your response ability.
Yeah.
So your ability to respond.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
And if you do something successfully, if you respond successfully, then that means you have those abilities and are able to respond with them. And if you do something unsuccessfully, what people call fail or any of those sorts of negative words, all it means is, I haven't learned enough responses. So I simply need to go and learn something more or experience something more, learn through experience, so I can build up my responses, so I can become more response able.
Yeah, yeah. And the reason why being able to respond to the client is so important is because the client holds the key to everything in therapy, right? Yeah. So the key to effective therapy is not necessarily any specific technique, not even the therapists themselves, but it's what the client brings and the client-therapist relationship that emerges. So let's talk about common factors.
Yeah, that's that first principle that we follow, what the client's natural capacities. And yeah, that's right. Common factors is one of the terms that is used around in the educational framework. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So we've got a few stunning charts in the book talk about common factors in psychotherapy, and in one way, it's shocking for all of us that love the academics and love learning techniques and everything. And we think, we've got all of this down pat, so we're going to, really, that's going to be 90% of the effectiveness of psychotherapy. But we're just really mistaken.
We're sadly mistaken,
Yeah.
and we do try. And this is a good example, and it happens very early in the introduction. As we start to talk about this first principle of client resources, that we're not just going to tell you what we think is the best or the most relevant idea. We're going to try and talk about the subject. So, of course, there are many, many aspects that we can cover, but we cover at least two, plus some other discussions. But this lovely stuff, we've got the early work by Assay and Lambert in the late 90s, and they're talking about the client, what they call the extra therapeutic resources as 40% of the experience, of therapeutic experience, and the theory or technique, perhaps 15% or so. Expectancy, sort of placebo, the excitement effect, they call 15%, and then the therapeutic relationship, what we've later called the co-creative experience, is about 30%. So pretty big aspect there. But then we jump to later on in 2010 and some work done from Duncan and his colleagues, where they actually go, no, it's about 87% is therapeutic client resources and extra therapeutic elements, and 13% is everything else. So that's the expectancy, the alliance, the client, the model, the feedback. So how does that work, regardless of which guys are actually giving us the most accurate position? I think we take in all those. How do we take in all those and work with them? Complex systems, thinking in the system.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but when we look at that chart from Duncan, 13% of the treatment effect are all of these other things, including the therapist, who makes about half of that 13%. And you think, well, I'm not bringing to the table much of a difference at all. Now we'll touch on what is a non-linear in this complex system.
Because that's right. In a linear system, as we're told, effort in is equal to effort out. So impact in is equal to impact out. So if I'm the therapist and I'm only adding, half of 13 or 5% or something, then I'm only having 5% impact. Well, what's the point of me? And complex systems changes, if you think in the way complex systems work, it changes the whole framework of it. And so we go through complex systems to some degree, but in that context, just looking at that particular element, is that in complex systems, what comes into the system, so energy in, has an unpredictable and potentially huge impact on the entire system itself.
Yeah.
So when you think in linear systems, it doesn't look like the therapist does terribly much. Why are we bothering? What's the point?
Yeah.
But when you think in complex systems, that therapist impact is the very thing that is needed to stimulate and activate that 87% of stuff in the client to activate, connect, integrate, and to produce that enormously beneficial effect. Remembering that the thing that might be blocking them might only be 1% of their life, one single traumatic event or one single aspect of attachment that they need to dispel and understand and shift. And just by moving that one thing, we've seen it so often. We call it insight, we call it transformational change, but it is actually the unpredictable and expansive effect of what occurs in complex systems.
I've told the story before. I won't go into all the details of the story, but was with a client. We had a little bit of preamble discussion. I mentioned something in passing. I can't even remember myself what the details were. But then we had a whole session. I was, trying to do, my technique really well. Anyway, the client went away, they came back, and they had experienced transformational change. And my initial thought was, wow, I must have done the whole technique really well.
Yes, Matt, tell me how wonderful you were.
but so when I questioned them about what it was an offhanded remark that I'd made at the very beginning, which to me didn't even relate to what the problem was. And it had struck a chord. They went home, they had thought about it. And things sort of just snowballed for them. And almost like by mistake, like they had this transformational experience.
Yes,
and
the serendipity.
Yes. So just an example. So that was completely nonlinear in my mind, in terms of, I'm doing this technique to help them change. It was completely nonlinear.
So it was only a fraction of a percent of your fraction of a percent.
Yes.
That actually had this huge high percentage impact on the client.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I must admit, because I've been, I'm beginning to, I'm continuing my thinking in relation to all this stuff that we're working on in these client resources. And based on also my work with Ernest Rossi and then his work before him with Milton Erickson, this idea of the client as a resource is, I'm just now, and this is a bit new, it's not in the book so much, and I'm planning on doing some research and some work on this over the next few years to expand it. But what if it is the client is not a resource, the client is the source?
Yeah.
So this idea that all these different therapies, rather than being somebody cleverly thinking up something that can fix people, that what it is people who have very sensitively and in great intuitive, serendipitous, but also thoughtful observation have noticed about human beings, about clients, and then certainly they've gone off and expanded it and given it a form and given it a method that you can utilize to apply it. But all they're doing is describing a small element of what human beings already possess.
Yeah.
I mean, I know Francine Shapiro. She personally found her eyes moving from side to side, and then went on to develop EMDR. So she was the source.
Yeah.
And I've seen people do this. Their eyes move side to side, and they come sort of open up and say, "Oh, I feel better about my trauma now." Yeah. So it's a natural thing within us, and that's why we learn all these things. That's why we need to know about everything.
That's right. Now, and I must say, my little example there of serendipitous, whatever comment it was that I made, that's not to suggest that psychotherapy is completely, random, and we see a way more, positive effects when we are being, sensitive to the client, and we're applying, the appropriate techniques.
Absolutely. Yeah. Other times it's the method is fantastic, and it's exactly what the client was. I had a client the other day who contacts by text every now and again, and she said, "Are you a solution-focused therapist?"
Right.
And so she'd actually obviously done a bit of Dr. Googling.
Yes.
But she's quite right. But I'm using a solution-focused framework with her because that's what I think is the best response to her stuff. And I am so pleased that I've attended all the conferences that I've attended and done the studies that I've done, so that I was able to recognize her need for a solution-focused approach.
Exactly.
And so I went with the approach rather than that I delivered the approach because I thought it was that was the way to solve her problems.
Isn't that part of the motivation behind the book, is that we want therapists to be flexible enough to be whatever they need to be to the client. So we don't necessarily need to have gone to those big conferences and got those certificates in all of these different methods, but we know enough that we can apply ourselves in these different ways to be the most effective we can be.
Yeah, and that's the point of the case study that we use in the introduction, is that you actually need about 4 different awarenesses about things. You need to know about behavioral processes. You need to know about affective responses and disorders, but you also need to know about some neurobiology to know, to have a sense, to give you that intuitive, a deeper intuitive sense of where some blockage or where some change might be occurring. And you need to know about some of the psychopathologies to understand the medications that the person has been prescribed by various other practitioners. I've always said that with clients, tell me what your medications are. And they say, oh, can you prescribe? I said, no, but what your medications tell me is what your prescribing therapist is thinking about you.
Yeah.
And they found it quite surprising.
Just like asking, what's your diet like? And we've done that documentary on the gut-brain axis. So
yes.
We're not dietitians, but this is information that's really informative. And
we know enough about diet to hear if someone comes up and responds with saying, I'm pretty much a fast food diet, fried food thing. We know enough about the system to be able to say, I think we need to refer you to a naturopath or a dietitian or whatever other particular practitioner that suits them and is available. Yeah, so really interesting.
Yeah. Now, Richard, for those that are not familiar with nonlinear complex systems, how about we just quickly define what a complex system is, talk a little bit about the different elements, and maybe give some practical examples of what they are.
Yeah, that might be a really good aspect. And we've had a look at the client resources and the aspects of what we're doing with the co-created. We've really kind of covered that. But this complex system, thinking in systems is not difficult, but it's not easy, because you've got to overcome really what has been a whole lifetime of education in the process. We learn that 2 + 2 = 4. But what complex systems tell us is that 2 + 2 = who knows?
Yeah.
And what you put in. But what we do is we've actually got a nice little diagram. I had a bit of fun creating this, and it's based on the broad work and also the work that I did with Ernest Rossi, and we published in our book on the mirroring hands process, because there we are with mirroring hands, talking about almost a hypnotherapeutic framework, but still all these principles apply. Yeah. So the main thing with a complex system is the way in which the elements of the system affect the system. So it's not about things in and things out. So what you do is you reorganize yourself and you listen to your client, and what you're looking for is, what is the foundation? What's the fundamental elements? Those things that don't change, that the whole system is sitting on. And that could be their gender. It could be the impacts of various other elements of their DNA. There's a whole bunch of systems there that affect that. Then we have organizing rules or organizing elements, things that the way in which the body seeks to organize itself.
Yep.
Now, what's interesting is we organize our system towards a better state, towards some kind of homeostasis, some kind of manageable state. And these organizing principles help us do that.
These are like internal rules, right, of the system.
That's right. Now, if you've got someone well-balanced who feels happy and is terrific, then you look at their organizing principles, and you'll probably find that they've got an organizing principle of secure attachment.
Right.
And they've got an organizing principle of generalized trust of authority figures. Now, you then might go to another client who's struggling in a problem and having all kinds of difficulties in life. And you'll find that their organizing principle is an insecure attachment, or it's a trauma. That what they do, particularly, for example, one of the ones is the mask that people do, sort of the persona that people, the protective persona, the shell that they put up. Now, that's an organizing principle of, when in doubt, put up the shell, you will be safe. because, of course, that's the homeostasis we want to be safe. Whereas our other, more balanced person, they open their arms up and embrace people because they've got a secure attachment and haven't had these. It's a different set of organizing principles.
Okay, so we've got fundamental principles, we've got organizing rules. What's the next one?
Well, then what we've got to understand is the nature of chaos. And chaos is a sort of a small element of describing the complex system. But the main message that we get from chaos is that with very small changes to what we call the initial conditions, so they can be the foundational principles, but certainly these organizing principles, that with a very small change for that, you can have a very large outcome. And this all started off with Lorenz, who was doing weather work. And he was kind of a bit bored with calculating everything to 17 decimal places. So he just sort of calculated them to 3 or 4. And he found that the outcome of the predictive model was entirely different. And the more numbers he added, the more it changed. And the more numbers he added, the more likely he was to get an accurate type of response. So the mistake of thinking when people think about complex systems is that everything is totally haywire and crazy and totally unpredictable. All it's saying is that you can't predict the exact outcome because it's not linear. But actually, there is a predictability to the system on the basis of the organizing principles. So if I'm looking at someone who's got insecure attachment or has a traumatic experience or has a fearfulness towards or authority or father figures or various other things, then I can reasonably predict that they're going to move towards this uncomfortable PTSD type of trauma type of response. So I'm then going, wow, what I need to do is I need to change that organizing principle. And there we have all kinds of things that we talk about in the book, memory reconsolidation. We talk about the CBT processes. We talk about doing somatic therapies in order to release it from somatic areas. You know, there's a wonderful host of ways in which you can approach changing those initial conditions, because a single tiny thing, like the single thing you said, or the entire therapy itself, or as I had one time where someone saw a bent flower in a vase behind me, that they find the metaphor that, and that metaphor can do enormous impact on them.
Okay. So for me, when I think of the element of chaos, I think fuzzy boundaries, like it's blurry boundaries. We can have a general predictability, but never absolutely precise because of this chaos element. Would I be right?
Yeah, and with those fuzzy boundaries, it allows for not being fixed. It encourages you to not be fixed, but it also allows you to accept totally surprising and radical change. So chaos is the understanding within the complex system that allows us to accept instant transformational change. And not sit there and go, oh gosh, my client's lying to me, or I'm stupid, or I'm imagining, or wow, my therapeutic methodology doesn't say that transformational change comes here. They say it comes later. So this idea of going, at any moment, something immediately surprising can occur. That's the fundamental understanding from that.
Okay. Now we've got 9 of these, so let me just rattle them off again. So we've got fundamental principles, organizing rules, chaos. Then we have
order and disorder, which just very briefly talks about this type of order and disorder. And Dan Siegel talks about this really nicely. I've been talking about it for years as well, that we have a rigidity at one side and a chaos, so a sort of a dissipating on one side and a disintegrating at the other. And life exists pleasantly in between those two. We talk then about attractors. So what is drawing the system, is something drawing the system towards it, which certainly when we're working with trauma, or if we're working with addiction, or if we're working with some of the unipolar elements or the bipolar elements of affective disorders, what type of attractors are pulling the system, and can we change those attractors? We go into understanding self-organization, that actually, given the opportunity and the appropriate circumstances, a system will naturally move itself towards well-being.
Right.
So we see that in our immune system, we see that in our digestive system, we see that in our neurobiological system, which we talk about all through the book. That it's very important, this aspect of feedback, that when something good happens, that will roll back into the system, stimulate something else, which hopefully is good, which will roll back into the system. So it's not this linear process forward. It's this constant, a dynamic interplay, which is really producing the thing that is the most important understanding of complex systems, which is emergence. That out of all this stuff, the organizing rules, the chaos, the self-organization, the feedback, the attractors, the order, out of all of that emerges something that we can see. So we can then, so that emerges the behavior, emerges their emotional response, emerges the state of being. And all those are things that are going on underneath.
Okay. Fantastic. Now, if anyone thought we're talking about theoretical physics, you would be partially right, because all of this all comes out of, theoretical physics, but we can apply it to biology just as well.
Yeah. This is a part of the complex system, that everything that we have academically and intellectually produced and put out into a book or put out into a conversation has come from somewhere, and it's come from the system within. Yeah. And so everything applies to everything in some degree.
Yeah. So we better wrap up, Richard. I was just thinking, we should finish with, what our hopes are for readers of the book. And just to reiterate, we are curating a lot of diverse information here. Neither Richard or I, we don't have PhDs in the science of psychotherapy, although one might argue we've done enough research and study to get a PhD in the science of psychotherapy. But it's not any one thing.
Yeah.
It's a broad perspective that we're trying to get across here. So when we talk about our hopes for the book, John Arden, in his foreword to the book, he says that our job as psychotherapists is to identify the parts of this complex system that we've just been talking about that make up the client and the client-therapist relationship, that we help them to orchestrate this harmonious feedback loop that Richard was just talking about. So we're kind of like a conductor. So another metaphor here to help us here, a conductor helping our clients make adjustments to all the systems, in this complex system of theirs to support health and well-being. And as we know, a conductor, he stands on the podium and he doesn't play any instruments. He doesn't make any sound, but he is acutely aware of every instrument and how the sound all comes together. And so my hope is that we're introducing you to this amazing orchestra and to get a feel for what it's like to stand on the podium and to, wave the baton.
Yes. And with that goal of being able to step down from the podium and allow the client to step up to be the conductor of their own orchestra.
Wow.
Because they have, through various reasons, and we've all done the study of what blocks and interferes and interrupts, determined that they are not able to do so. And we can co-create. See, look, I can do this. Do you want to do this? I mean, Albert Bandura discovered a word for that. He called it self-efficacy. Yeah. So we build up their self-efficacy. And then suddenly they go, oh, if I can do that, I can do the other thing. And of course, for some people, they still have to learn one by one. But others can just do one bit of self-efficacy. And suddenly it all cascades in this beautiful feedback-oriented, systemic, unexpected transformational change.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, everyone, for tuning in and listening to our introduction to the Practitioner's Guide to the Science of Psychotherapy. We'll leave links in the show notes as to where you can get hold of your copy. And we do hope that you will join us at the Science of Psychotherapy, become a subscriber, join the tribe. We'd love to see you there too.
Yes, we have all the information and more in spades that you can explore and dive into and expand. This book is talking about what Matt and I have learned over the last years. And it's just been the most fantastic experience. And we're still just scratching the surface.
Absolutely.
So much exciting stuff to learn and know.
That's right. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, and we'll catch you next time.
Bye for now.